Panic filled the air, a sudden, chilling realization dawning on Karen's face as the heavy click echoed through the humid evening. Her eyes, wide with a dawning horror, darted from the now sealed gate of my backyard to the 20 bewildered faces of her uninvited guests. They were trapped. Just moments earlier, the pool had been a chaotic symphony of splashing, shrieks of laughter, and the blaring, tinny music from a portable speaker. Now, an eerie quiet descended, punctuated only by the distant hum of my air conditioning unit and the frantic chirping of crickets. Karen, the self-appointed queen of the HOA, had snuck her entire pool party into my private oasis, thinking she was clever. What she hadn't anticipated was the ironclad security system I'd installed, the one that had just sealed them all inside. The pool lights shimmered, casting an almost theatrical glow on their stunned expressions. They were in my yard, surrounded by my fence, with no way out. A nervous cough rippled through the group. Karen's usually stern features melted into pure, unadulterated fear. What would I do? And more importantly, how had I managed to lock them in without anyone noticing? The summer sun in Willow Creek always brought out the best in our neighborhood, or at least, it was supposed to. Our community, nestled amongst rolling hills and dotted with mature oak trees, prided itself on its manicured lawns and friendly faces. People waved from their porches, kids rode bikes down the quiet streets, and the annual 4th of July picnic was legendary. For a long time, it felt like a little slice of paradise. My name is Alex, and I'd lived in Willow Creek for nearly 10 years, ever since I bought my cozy ranch house with its surprisingly large backyard. That yard, with its mature rose bushes and a sprawling oak that provided ample shade, was my sanctuary. I had invested a lot of time and effort into making it perfect, a place where I could unwind after a long day at the hospital. As a nurse, I dealt with a lot of stress, and sometimes, all I wanted was to come home to peace and quiet. A few years ago, I decided to finally fulfill a lifelong dream. I installed a swimming pool. It wasn't a massive, Olympic-sized pool, but a comfortable, inviting space, perfect for a refreshing dip or a quiet evening float. The construction was a huge project, costing a significant chunk of my savings, but it was worth every penny. The first summer with the pool was pure bliss. My friends, Sarah and David, would come over for barbecues, and their kids, little Lily and Sam, loved splashing around. We had quiet evenings under the stars, the gentle lapping of the water a soothing soundtrack. It truly felt like my own personal resort. However, peace in Willow Creek was a fragile thing, especially after Karen moved in 2 years ago. She bought the largest house on the cul-de-sac, a grand, imposing structure that somehow seemed to radiate her personality. From the moment she arrived, she made it clear she was here to improve the neighborhood, which mostly meant imposing her will on everyone else. Karen was the kind of person who saw rules as suggestions for others but ironclad laws for herself to enforce. She quickly joined the Homeowners Association board, and before anyone really knew what was happening, she was the president. Her reign began subtly enough. First, it was polite notices about trash can placement on collection days. Then, it escalated to stern warnings about lawn height and acceptable garden gnome aesthetics. My personal favorite was the memo about the proper shade of beige for house paint, which caused a minor uproar among residents who had just painted their houses various other shades of beige. Karen had an uncanny ability to find fault where no one else saw any, and a knack for making even the most minor infractions feel like federal offenses. I tried to keep a low profile, hoping to avoid her radar. My yard was always meticulously kept, my house a tasteful shade of light gray, well within her arbitrary aesthetic guidelines. My pool, however, was a different matter. Willow Creek didn't have a community pool. Most people, if they wanted to swim, drove to the public aquatic center in the next town over, or they had friends with pools. Karen, it turned out, saw my pool as a community resource that I was selfishly hoarding. It started with thinly veiled comments at HOA meetings. "It's a shame some residents have such wonderful amenities that aren't available to everyone," she'd remark, her gaze subtly flicking in my direction. Then came the suggestions. "Perhaps you'd consider opening your pool for a neighborhood social," she'd inquire, always with a saccharine smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. I politely declined, explaining that my pool was a private investment for my personal use. Karen, however, was not easily deterred. She began to escalate her campaign. I'd find flyers in my mailbox about community spirit and the benefits of shared resources. Anonymous notes would appear on my door, subtly hinting that my refusal to share was unneighborly. It was clear these were all her doing. One particularly memorable incident involved her trying to organize a pool usage schedule for my backyard, which she presented to me with a straight face at my doorstep. I had to firmly, but politely, explain that my property was not part of the HOA's common areas and therefore not subject to their rules regarding shared amenities. The tension simmered for months, a low-grade hum of annoyance under the surface of our otherwise pleasant neighborhood. I continued to enjoy my pool, sometimes feeling a pang of guilt that Karen was so insistent, but quickly reminding myself that I had worked hard for this, and it was mine. I'd invested not just money, but countless hours into creating my backyard oasis. My empathy for others, a trait that served me well in my nursing profession, usually led me to be accommodating. However, this felt different. This was not about helping someone in need, this was about someone feeling entitled to something that wasn't theirs. My kindness had a limit when it came to outright imposition. Then came the accidental trespassers. First, it was a few kids, ostensibly chasing a runaway ball, who would conveniently wander towards my pool gate. I'd gently redirect them, and they'd apologize profusely. Then, it was adults, just admiring my landscaping, from dangerously close to the pool deck. I installed a stronger lock on the gate, a good, solid deadbolt that required a key. That seemed to deter them for a while. The final straw before the incident tonight, the one that made me decide on more drastic measures, happened last week. I came home from a particularly grueling shift, looking forward to a relaxing swim. As I approached my house, I saw a familiar figure by my pool gate. It was Karen, not just admiring, but actively fiddling with the lock. She had a small toolkit in her hand, and she jumped back guiltily when she saw me. She stammered something about checking the gate's alignment as an HOA representative, but her face was flushed, and her eyes avoided mine. That's when I knew. Her obsession with my pool had reached a new level, a level that bordered on invasion. My peaceful sanctuary was no longer feeling so peaceful. I felt constantly on edge, wondering what Karen would try next. It was then I decided to upgrade my security. I installed motion-activated cameras and, most importantly, a robust, electronically controlled locking mechanism on my pool gate. It was designed to look like a simple deadbolt from the outside, but from my phone, I could lock and unlock it, and, crucially, activate a one-way locking system that would only allow exit if I disengaged it. It was a failsafe, a last resort, something I hoped I'd never have to use. My intention wasn't to trap anyone, but to secure my property against unwelcome intrusions. I just wanted my peace back, my ability to enjoy my backyard without constant vigilance. I never imagined I'd actually have to use that system, especially not on Karen herself, surrounded by a crowd of her guests. Tonight, I was sitting inside, enjoying a quiet dinner, when I heard the faint sounds of splashing and muffled laughter from my backyard. My heart sank. It was 10 p.m. Who could possibly be in my pool at this hour? A quick glance at the security camera feed on my phone sent a jolt of disbelief, then a wave of cold fury through me. There she was, Karen, in a shockingly bright floral swimsuit, doing a clumsy dive into my sparkling water. And she wasn't alone. Behind her, a veritable crowd of people, young and old, spilled onto my patio, some already in the water, others setting up towels on my lounge chairs. There were at least 20 of them, perhaps more. It was a full-blown pool party, in my backyard, without my permission. My initial reaction was a mix of shock and utter bewilderment. How had they gotten in? The gate was locked, I was certain. Then I remembered the electronic lock I had installed. A quick check confirmed it, the gate showed as unlocked. She must have picked it, or somehow bypassed it. My blood ran cold. This wasn't just an accidental trespass anymore, this was a deliberate, brazen invasion of my private property. My desire for peace and quiet evaporated, replaced by a steely resolve. I watched them for a few minutes, unseen, listening to their boisterous chatter. Karen was holding court by the shallow end, directing people, pointing out where to put their towels, as if she owned the place. This was beyond audacious. This was a violation of every boundary imaginable. I took a deep breath, the anger coiling in my stomach. This was it. The line had been crossed. My hand hovered over the lock button on my phone, then moved to the one-way lock option, a feature I had specifically designed for extreme situations. With a grim determination, I pressed it. The immediate effect was not obvious from the outside. The gate simply was locked, no longer able to be opened from the inside without my remote intervention. No alarm blared, no lights flashed. The party continued, oblivious. I watched as they splashed, laughed, and made themselves at home. A young man, probably in his early 20s, went to fetch something from outside the gate, pulling on the handle. He frowned, pulled harder, then shrugged and walked back to the pool, assuming it was just stiff. The party continued for another half hour, the revelers completely unaware of their predicament. Then, the first hint of trouble. A child, perhaps 7 or 8, started whining that he wanted to go home. His mother, a woman with a tired expression, led him towards the gate, pulling on the handle. Nothing. She pulled again, harder this time. Her brows furrowed. "It's stuck, honey," she called to her husband, who was still laughing loudly by the deep end. He ambled over, gave a cursory tug, and then put his shoulder into it. Still nothing. The initial jovial atmosphere began to subtly shift. Others started noticing, curious about the commotion at the gate. Karen, sensing a disturbance in her perfectly orchestrated invasion, strode over, her face a picture of annoyance. "What's the problem?" she demanded, a hint of her usual imperious tone in her voice. The husband explained the gate was stuck. Karen, ever confident in her ability to control situations, grabbed the handle herself. She pulled. Nothing. She pulled harder, bracing her feet. Her face began to redden. Her guests, now watching intently, started murmuring. A ripple of unease spread through the group. It was then, as Karen pulled and strained at the unyielding gate, that she truly looked at it. She noticed the new, more robust mechanism, the subtle gleam of reinforced steel that hadn't been there when she'd so carelessly bypassed the old lock. Her eyes widened, a dawning comprehension creeping into them. She looked at her reflection in the glass of my patio door, then back at the gate, then back at my house. It was at that precise moment, as the realization of her predicament crashed down on her, that I saw it, the sheer, unadulterated panic bloom across her face, mirroring the realization now dawning on her 20 trapped guests. Karen's face, a mask of dawning horror, was a sight I wouldn't soon forget. Her eyes, usually narrowed in judgment, were now wide, darting frantically between the unyielding gate and the suddenly silent group of her guests. The realization that they were well and truly locked in spread through the crowd like a ripple on the water. Whispers began to circulate, hushed questions about how they would leave. The earlier boisterous laughter had died, replaced by a tense quiet, broken only by the distant sounds of the neighborhood. Karen, usually so composed and in control, began to pull at the gate again, her movements becoming more frantic, her breathing shallow. She rattled the handle, then pounded on the frame, her earlier confidence completely shattered. Her guests looked to her for answers, but she had none, only a growing panic. The incident with Karen trying to tamper with my old lock had been the final push. I had been stewing over her audacity for days, the image of her hunched over my gate with a toolkit a constant replay in my mind. It wasn't just the invasion of privacy, it was the sheer disrespect for boundaries. My home was my haven, a place where I could recharge from the emotional demands of my nursing job. Working in the emergency room meant constantly navigating crises, offering comfort, and making quick decisions under immense pressure. At the hospital, empathy was a vital tool, something I offered freely to patients and their families. But empathy also required setting boundaries, knowing where my responsibility ended and another's began. This was a lesson Karen seemed determined to make me learn outside of work hours. The decision to install the advanced security system wasn't born out of malice, but out of a desperate need for peace. I had researched different options, spoke with several security experts, and finally settled on a system that offered not just surveillance but robust access control. The one-way lock feature was something the installer, a friendly and understanding man named Ben, had suggested when I explained my predicament with a persistent, boundary-crossing neighbor. He understood that my aim wasn't to trap people, but to deter them, to make my property genuinely secure. Think of it as a very polite, "stay out" sign that works, he had chuckled. I had hoped it would never come to this, never imagined I'd be using it on 20 people, let alone the HOA president herself. The hours leading up to their arrival had been deceptively normal. I had come home from my shift, tired but looking forward to a quiet evening. The late afternoon sun was beginning to dip, casting long shadows across my meticulously manicured lawn. I spent some time watering my rose bushes, admiring the vibrant reds and soft pinks, a small ritual that always brought me a sense of calm. The scent of blooming roses mingled with the subtle aroma of freshly cut grass, a perfect summer evening symphony. As I moved around my backyard, I did a quick check of the pool area, just a habit born from Karen's previous attempts. The gate was securely latched, the new electronic lock humming faintly. Everything seemed perfectly in order. I even tested the lock from my phone, hearing the satisfying click. Good, I thought, at least tonight I won't have any surprises. I went inside, heated up some leftover lasagna, and settled down in front of the TV, planning to catch up on a medical drama I'd been following. The house was quiet, bathed in the soft glow of the lamps. I was halfway through my meal when I heard it. A faint splash, followed by a muffled laugh. My fork clattered against the plate. It couldn't be. I muted the TV and listened intently. There it was again, clearer this time, the unmistakable sound of people in my pool. A cold dread seeped into my stomach, quickly followed by a surge of anger. This was beyond anything I had anticipated. My mind raced, trying to comprehend how they could have gotten in. Had the lock failed? Had they broken it? I grabbed my phone, my fingers fumbling slightly as I opened the security app. The live feed from the backyard cameras popped up. What I saw made my jaw drop. The gate was wide open, swinging slightly in the evening breeze. And there, leading the charge, was Karen. She wasn't just walking in, she was swaggering, an almost triumphant look on her face as she gestured for a line of people behind her to follow. They carried coolers, towels, and inflatable toys. It was an organized invasion, a full-blown party caravan. The unlocked status I had seen earlier suddenly made sense. Karen had found a way to bypass the external lock, probably with some kind of master key or lockpicking tool. The thought of her standing there, methodically circumventing my security measures, filled me with a fresh wave of indignation. My polite, "stay out" sign had been willfully ignored, brazenly bypassed. I watched, transfixed, as my private sanctuary transformed into a public swimming hole. A half-dozen kids immediately cannonballed into the water, sending splashes cascading over my perfectly arranged patio furniture. Adults set up camp on my lounge chairs, chattering loudly, completely oblivious to the fact they were trespassing. Karen, meanwhile, was directing traffic, pointing out the bathroom access, presumably my own, and even adjusting the volume on a blaring portable speaker. It was an absolute circus. My initial anger slowly began to morph into something else, a cold, hard resolve. This wasn't about a simple misunderstanding anymore. This was a deliberate act of disrespect, a calculated move to assert her dominance and take what she felt entitled to. She wasn't just using my pool, she was making a statement. And I realized, with a clarity that settled deep in my bones, that I had to make a statement back. I considered my options. I could storm out there, confront them, and demand they leave. But what would that achieve? A shouting match? A scene that would undoubtedly escalate into a messy public spectacle? Karen would undoubtedly try to twist the narrative, claim she had permission or that it was an accident. I wanted to avoid direct confrontation if possible, not because I was afraid, but because I wanted a clear, undeniable demonstration of boundaries. My gaze fell on the one-way lock button on my phone screen. This was precisely what it was for. It was a silent, unarguable barrier. They had walked in freely, thinking they had outsmarted me. Now, they would experience the consequences of their actions, not through my words, but through the immovable reality of a locked gate. It was a choice born from frustration, but also from a deep-seated belief that people needed to respect others' property and privacy. My job taught me the importance of clear communication, and sometimes, actions spoke louder than words. I pressed the button. The small, silent indicator on my screen turned from green to red, confirming the lock was engaged. I watched as the party continued, the sounds of splashing and laughter echoing faintly into my living room. They had no idea. The casual way people tried the gate, pulling on it half-heartedly, assuming it was just stiff or a little old, only confirmed how utterly oblivious they were. The young man who shrugged it off, the mother who gently told her son it was stuck, they had no inkling of the actual situation. It was almost surreal, watching them enjoy themselves, completely unaware of the trap they had walked into. I saw Karen herself, at one point, doing a rather undignified belly flop into the deep end, sending water flying. Her enjoyment seemed so absolute, so complete, in that stolen moment. The irony was almost comical, if not for the underlying violation. As the minutes stretched on, the golden hour of dusk slowly gave way to the deeper blues of night. The pool lights automatically clicked on, illuminating the scene in an ethereal glow. The party, if anything, seemed to be winding down slightly, people starting to gather their towels and belongings, perhaps getting ready to leave. That's when the first real attempts to exit began. The initial confusion, the casual tugs on the gate, gradually escalated into more concerted efforts. The mother and her son, the husband who tried to shoulder it open. Each failure chipped away at the carefree atmosphere. And then, Karen approached. Her usual authoritative stride was evident, even in her swimsuit. She clearly intended to rectify the minor malfunction of the gate. She gripped the handle, her brow furrowed in concentration. She pulled once, then twice, harder each time. The gate remained stubbornly shut. Her face, usually so adept at maintaining a facade of superiority, began to contort. Her eyes scanned the gate, then the frame, her gaze searching for a latch, a button, anything that would explain its sudden immobility. It was clear she was baffled, her usual confidence replaced by a flicker of uncertainty. She exchanged a quick, hushed word with the husband who had tried earlier, then tried again, pulling with all her might, her muscles straining. Her breath hitched. That was the moment. The subtle change in her expression, the way her eyes darted from the gate to the security camera near the patio door, then back to the house. The casual amusement from her guests faded, replaced by confusion, then concern. Karen's movements became jerky, her previous indignation replaced by a raw, undeniable terror. Her 20 guests, who had come for a fun, illicit swim, now stood frozen, watching their fearless leader crumble. The quiet deepened, heavy with unspoken questions. What would happen next? The night air, once warm and inviting, now felt chilling. They were in my pool, on my property, and they couldn't leave. The immediate aftermath of Karen's discovery was a whirlwind of confusion and escalating fear among her guests. The murmuring grew louder, questions flying through the air like agitated bees. What's going on, Karen? Why isn't the gate opening? Are we locked in? Karen, usually quick with a sharp retort or a dismissive wave of her hand, was speechless. Her face was pale, her eyes darting around my backyard as if searching for an escape route that simply wasn't there. The jovial party atmosphere had completely vanished, replaced by an unsettling silence broken only by the splashes of water from a couple of children still playing, oblivious to the rising tension. Their parents, however, were no longer laughing. They were gathering their belongings, their movements anxious, their gazes fixed on the unyielding gate and the panicked HOA president. The air crackled with a palpable sense of dread. Watching the scene unfold from the quiet solitude of my living room felt like observing a bizarre, real-life drama. The security cameras offered a clear, unblinking view of my backyard, capturing every nuance of their growing distress. It wasn't a malicious pleasure I felt, but a deep sense of validation. My boundaries, so carelessly violated, were now undeniable. It was a stark lesson in consequences, played out in real time. I remained still, my phone clutched in my hand, observing. This was not about revenge, it was about reclaiming my peace, demonstrating that actions have repercussions, and establishing that my property was not a free-for-all. The situation escalated quickly. A burly man, who I recognized as Mr. Henderson from down the street, approached the gate with a determined look. He was known for his strength, often boasting about his DIY projects. He grabbed the gate with both hands and heaved, grunting with effort. The gate didn't budge. He tried again, putting his full weight into it, his face reddening. Still, it held firm. A collective gasp went through the crowd. This wasn't just stuck, this was locked. And locked in a way they clearly couldn't defeat. Karen, regaining a fraction of her composure, began to rattle the gate again, but with less force, more desperation. There must be a trick to it, she insisted, her voice higher than usual. She started pressing around the frame, looking for a hidden button or a release lever. Her efforts were futile. The lock I had installed was sophisticated, designed to be tamper-proof from the outside. Suddenly, a child, perhaps the same one who had wanted to go home earlier, started to cry. It was a high-pitched, distressed wail that cut through the tension, making the situation even more real. His mother rushed to comfort him, stroking his hair, but her own eyes were wide with worry. Other children, sensing the shift in adult moods, began to look uneasy. The pool, once a source of joyous fun, now seemed to ripple with a subtle current of anxiety. Alex. Are you home, Alex? Karen's voice boomed suddenly, startling everyone, including me. She was yelling towards my back door, her voice a mix of frustration and forced politeness. We seem to have an issue with your gate. I didn't respond immediately. I simply continued to watch. I wanted them to fully grasp the gravity of the situation. This wasn't a casual oversight, this was a deliberate consequence. The silence from my house only amplified their predicament, making my absence feel like a deliberate choice, which, in a way, it was. Karen, seeing no response, began to knock on my back door, first tentatively, then with more force. Thump, thump, thump. The sound echoed through my quiet house. Her guests watched, some with annoyed expressions, others with growing concern. Mr. Henderson, meanwhile, had moved to the side fence, examining the sturdy wooden planks. He gave a few experimental pushes, but the fence, recently reinforced, was solid. "This is ridiculous," exclaimed a woman I didn't recognize, her voice sharp with irritation. "We can't just be locked in here." "Don't worry, Martha," Karen said, trying to regain some semblance of authority, though her voice still trembled slightly. Alex will open it. There's probably just a misunderstanding. A misunderstanding. The word hung in the air, a stark contrast to the scene unfolding in my backyard. I scoffed silently. There was no misunderstanding. There was only a clear violation and an equally clear response. My phone buzzed. It was a text message from Sarah, my friend who lived 2 streets over. Heard some loud music from your place earlier. Everything okay? I paused, considering. Sarah was genuinely kind, a wonderful person. She wouldn't have approved of Karen's actions. I decided to send a brief, reassuring reply, careful not to reveal the full extent of the drama. Everything's fine, just dealing with a minor neighborly issue. Thanks for checking. I watched as Karen, her attempts at the door yielding no results, paced back and forth by the gate. She pulled out her phone, presumably to call someone. Who would she call? The HOA? The police? The thought of the police arriving filled me with a fleeting sense of unease, but then I reminded myself, they were trespassing on my private property. I was within my rights. The kids, now truly restless and sensing their parents' anxiety, began to clamor. One little girl started crying again, asking for her blanket. The party had officially devolved into a hostage situation, albeit a self-imposed one. The adults began to gather in a huddled group, speaking in hushed tones, their eyes occasionally darting towards my dark windows. They were trapped, and the person who trapped them was currently invisible. Then, an unexpected turn. A young man, probably a teenager, who had been quietly observing, suddenly broke away from the group. He moved quickly towards the far corner of my yard, near the dense shrubbery that bordered the next property. He was clearly looking for an alternative exit. My cameras followed him. He pushed aside some bushes, revealing a small gap in the fence, a spot where the wood had rotted slightly over time. It wasn't wide enough for an adult, but maybe a child could squeeze through. He called out, his voice hushed, "Hey! There's a spot here. Maybe a kid can get through." Karen's head snapped up. A glimmer of hope, desperate and fleeting, appeared on her face. "Go, go, Lily," she urged the little girl who was crying. The girl's mother, desperate, pushed her gently towards the gap. The child, small and agile, squeezed through, her little body wriggling with effort. A cheer went up from the trapped partygoers. One child was free. But then, a new problem arose. The next child, a slightly larger boy, tried to follow. He got stuck, his legs flailing, his cries echoing loudly. The teenager tried to push him, but he was wedged. The gap was simply too small for anyone larger than a very slender child. The brief flicker of hope died, replaced by a fresh wave of despair. The boy's parents rushed over, pulling at him, trying to free him. The more they struggled, the more stuck he became. This escape route was clearly not viable for most. The extreme event had come. The trapped boy's cries grew louder, more frantic. His parents were panicking, pulling at him, trying to dislodge him from the narrow opening. Karen rushed over, trying to offer unhelpful advice, her own fear making her shrill. The scene became chaotic, a frantic struggle in the dim light of my backyard. My carefully planned demonstration of boundaries had unexpectedly turned into something far more intense, far more immediate. My hand hovered over my phone, considering my next move. The boy's distressed cries echoed through the night. The situation was spiraling, and I knew, with a certainty that chilled me, that I could not let it continue like this. The desperate cries of the stuck boy echoed through the night, a piercing sound that tugged at something deep inside me. His parents were pulling and pushing, their faces etched with panic, while Karen hovered, offering frantic, unhelpful advice. The boy's struggle intensified, his whimpers turning into agonized screams as he remained firmly wedged in the narrow fence gap. The other guests, previously murmuring, were now openly distressed, watching the scene unfold with growing horror. The fleeting sense of validation I had felt earlier evaporated, replaced by a churning in my stomach. This had gone too far. My intention was to teach a lesson about boundaries, not to cause genuine distress or harm to a child. The sight of the boy's contorted face, red and tear-streaked, was more than I could bear to watch. My training as a nurse kicked in instantly, overriding the simmering anger I felt towards Karen and her invading party. My priority, above all else, became the safety and well-being of that child. While Karen's actions had been undeniably disrespectful and infuriating, a child's safety was paramount. There was a fine line between teaching a lesson and causing actual harm, and that line had just been crossed. I knew I had to intervene, and quickly. I put my phone down and walked towards the back door, my heart pounding with a mix of adrenaline and lingering frustration. My mind raced, strategizing the best way to handle the situation without completely losing my composure. I didn't want to appear as a vengeful homeowner, but as someone enforcing their rights. I took a deep breath, preparing myself for the confrontation that was about to unfold. As I opened the door, the cacophony from the backyard hit me like a physical wave. The distressed cries of the boy, the frantic voices of his parents, and the murmurs of the crowd filled the night air. The sudden opening of the door drew all eyes towards me. Every single person in my backyard froze, their heads snapping in my direction. The struggling boy's cries momentarily subsided, replaced by a stunned silence. Karen, who had been attempting to pry the fence open with her bare hands, straightened up slowly, her face a mixture of shock and defiance. Her eyes, wide and bloodshot from panic, met mine. For a moment, neither of us spoke. The silence stretched, thick with unspoken accusations and dawning realization. The pool lights cast long, dancing shadows, making the scene feel even more surreal. "Alex." Karen finally managed, her voice a strained whisper, though it quickly regained some of its usual bite. "Your gate. It's stuck. And now little Timmy is stuck in your fence." I walked onto the patio, my gaze sweeping over the assembled crowd. Their faces were a mix of guilt, fear, and a strange sort of curiosity. Some looked genuinely embarrassed, avoiding my eyes. Others, like Karen, seemed more indignant than remorseful. I made eye contact with Timmy's parents, who looked utterly desperate. Their son was still wedged, his breathing ragged. "The gate isn't stuck, Karen," I said, my voice calm and clear, cutting through the tense air. "It's locked." "I locked it." A collective gasp went through the crowd. Murmurs erupted again, louder this time. "He locked us in. He knew we were here." Karen's face flushed a deep red. You locked us in? How dare you? This is outrageous. You can't just trap people on your property," she sputtered, her voice rising to a shrill pitch. "This is my property, Karen," I replied, my gaze steady. "And you and your 20 guests trespassed onto it, without permission. After I politely declined your repeated requests to use my private pool. After you tried to pick my old lock. This is not a community pool. It's my private home. And it's secure." My words hung in the air, undeniable. The weight of their transgression seemed to settle over the partygoers. Many of them looked at Karen with dawning anger and betrayal. She had led them into this, assuring them it would be fine. "Now," I continued, my voice firm but now laced with a hint of concern as Timmy whimpered again, "the immediate priority is to get that boy out of my fence. After that, we can discuss the other matter." Karen, though clearly still furious, looked towards the struggling boy, her bravado faltering. The urgency in my voice, coupled with the child's distress, seemed to finally penetrate her self-importance. "Move away from him, Karen," I instructed, my voice sharper now. I knelt beside Timmy, assessing the situation. He was wedged tightly, his clothes snagged on the rough wood. "Okay, Timmy, can you breathe, sweetie?" I asked gently, my nurse instincts taking over. He nodded, sniffling. "Good. Try to relax. We're going to get you out." His parents, seeing me take charge, stepped back, relief warring with their continued anxiety. I carefully examined the fence, noting the angles of his body. It was a tight squeeze. "I need a bit of oil or soap," I said, looking up at the parents. "Something slippery." Mr. Henderson, who had moved closer, quickly offered, "I have some dish soap in my cooler, Alex. I brought it for the kids' slip and slide." He dashed to his cooler by the pool, returning with a bottle of blue dish soap. "Thank you," I said, taking the bottle. I carefully squirted some around Timmy's hips and legs, trying to get it into the tight crevices. The boy shivered from the cold liquid but remained still, trusting my touch. "Okay, on the count of 3, I'm going to gently push, and you try to wiggle forward, Timmy. Parents, can you gently pull from the other side?" We worked in sync. 1, 2, 3. I pushed, Timmy wriggled, and his parents pulled. Slowly, agonizingly, the boy began to slide free. There was a collective sigh of relief from the crowd as he finally popped out of the fence, tumbling into his father's waiting arms. He was shaken, tearful, and had some scrapes, but he was free. His mother hugged him tightly, murmuring thanks. "Thank you, Alex," Timmy's father said, his voice thick with emotion. "Thank you so much." I simply nodded, my gaze sweeping over Karen, who stood a little apart, her face unreadable. The immediate crisis was averted, but the larger problem remained. The air was still thick with tension, the silence now punctuated by the soft sounds of Timmy's parents comforting him. "Now," I said, my voice regaining its firm edge as I stood up, "let's address the matter of how you all got into my locked backyard. Karen, perhaps you'd care to explain?" Karen stiffened, her eyes narrowing. I just found the gate unlocked," she stammered, attempting to regain her composure and shift the blame. "It must have been left open." "That's interesting," I countered, a slight, knowing smile playing on my lips. "Because I personally locked it myself before I went inside. And the security cameras clearly show you and your guests entering through a gate that was initially locked. Perhaps you can explain how you opened it." My mention of security cameras sent a fresh wave of unease through the crowd. Several people exchanged nervous glances. Karen's eyes widened, a new layer of panic flashing through them. She hadn't anticipated I had surveillance. Her carefully constructed lie crumbled instantly. She tried to speak, but no words came out, only a choked sound. She was cornered, her invasion undeniably captured on video. The partygoers, realizing they had been misled, began to express their frustration more openly. "Karen, you told us it was an HOA event," someone accused. "You said Alex agreed to let us use the pool tonight," another voice chimed in. The blame was shifting rapidly from me to Karen, and she was clearly not prepared for the public outcry. Her reign of HOA terror had hit a major snag, right in my backyard, under the glow of my pool lights. The crowd, once her unwitting accomplices, now looked at her with a mix of anger and disappointment. This new, extreme event had arrived, Karen's public downfall. Karen stood frozen, caught in the harsh glare of the pool lights, her face a mask of mortification and fury as her guests turned on her. The murmurs escalated into an angry chorus of accusations. "You lied to us, Karen. I told my kids this was a community party. This is embarrassing." She stammered, trying to defend herself, but her words were drowned out by the rising tide of discontent. Her authority, once absolute in their eyes, crumbled before them. Some guests, particularly those with children, began gathering their belongings in earnest, clearly eager to distance themselves from the unfolding debacle. The air was thick with the bitter taste of betrayal, and all eyes, mine included, were fixed on the now exposed HOA president. The shift in the crowd's demeanor was remarkable. Just moments ago, they were a collective unit, enjoying an illicit swim. Now, they were a fractured group, many of them glaring at Karen, others nervously avoiding eye contact with me. My mention of the security cameras had been a strategic move, a silent witness to Karen's deceit. It removed any possibility of her spinning a false narrative, leaving her exposed and vulnerable. The immediate crisis of Timmy being stuck had passed, but a new, more intense one had begun for Karen. I just thought, it would be nice for everyone to enjoy the pool. Karen finally managed to stammer, her voice lacking its usual authoritative ring. She tried to appeal to the crowd, but her words rang hollow. Nice for everyone? Mr. Henderson interjected, his voice firm. You told me this was cleared with Alex. You said she offered it for a neighborhood event. Others chimed in, their voices overlapping, each person adding to the growing indictment of Karen's deception. I let them talk, absorbing the raw emotion. It was clear that Karen had used her position and her persuasive, often manipulative, tactics to convince these people that they were attending a legitimate event. Many looked genuinely embarrassed and apologetic, their gazes shifting from Karen to me with newfound respect. My patience, my calmness in handling the situation, particularly with Timmy, had clearly resonated. The fact is, I stated, raising my voice slightly to be heard over the murmuring, this is my private property. I pay for this pool's upkeep, its chemicals, its cleaning, and its insurance. It is not a community amenity. And no, I did not offer it for a neighborhood event. I explicitly declined. I paused, letting that sink in. Karen broke into my property and then brought all of you with her, under false pretenses. The word broke in hung in the air, heavy with implication. Some guests gasped. Karen's face contorted in a silent scream of outrage, but she said nothing, too stunned by the revelation of the security footage. She must have believed she was clever enough to bypass my lock without leaving a trace. My system, however, was designed to log every access attempt. I have footage of Karen bypassing my lock, I continued, my voice steady. And I have footage of every one of you entering my property without my permission. I understand many of you were misled, and for that, I am truly sorry you were put in this position. I looked directly at Timmy's parents, who nodded gratefully. However, this is still trespassing. A palpable fear rippled through the crowd. Trespassing carried consequences, and no one wanted legal trouble. The atmosphere shifted from anger towards Karen to a more personal concern for their own situations. So, how do we get out? A woman asked, her voice small and hesitant. I will unlock the gate, I replied. But before I do, I want to make one thing very clear. This behavior is unacceptable. My home is not a public park. My pool is not a community resource. This is private property, and it must be respected. I will be speaking with the HOA board about Karen's conduct, and I expect full cooperation from anyone who was misled into this situation. My gaze swept over them, letting my seriousness sink in. Karen, regaining a sliver of her former self, tried to interrupt. You can't do that, Alex. I'm the president. This is a misunderstanding. There is no misunderstanding, Karen, I cut her off, my voice sharp. You manipulated these people, violated my property, and put a child at risk. Your position as HOA president gives you no right to disregard property laws or common decency. I pulled out my phone again, and with a flourish that was perhaps a little dramatic but felt entirely justified, I pressed the button to unlock the gate. A distinct, audible click echoed through the night. The gate, which had been a symbol of their entrapment, now stood ready to open. There was a collective sigh of relief, followed by a rush towards the gate. People gathered their scattered belongings, pulling their children out of the pool. The quiet order of a mass exodus began. Parents quickly dried their kids, bundled them up, and hurried towards the exit. There were murmurs of "thank you, Alex" from some of the genuinely apologetic guests, and even a few shy glances of support. Many avoided eye contact, simply wanting to escape the uncomfortable situation. Karen, however, did not move immediately. She stood rooted to the spot, her eyes narrowed, watching her carefully constructed social standing unravel before her very eyes. Her party, her grand scheme to take over my pool, had backfired spectacularly. As the last of her guests filed out, leaving wet footprints on my patio and scattered towels, only Karen remained. She walked slowly towards the gate, her head held high, though her shoulders were tense. She turned to face me, her eyes blazing with a mixture of shame and fierce indignation. "You haven't heard the last of this, Alex," she hissed, her voice low and venomous. "You think you're so clever, locking us in. But I'm the HOA president. I'll make sure you regret this. There will be consequences for your unneighborly behavior." I met her gaze, unflinching. "Consequences, Karen," I replied calmly, "are exactly what you are experiencing right now. And I assure you, your actions tonight will have far greater consequences for you than mine will for me." Her jaw tightened. Without another word, she turned and strode through the now open gate, disappearing into the night. The click of the gate as it closed behind her felt almost final. I stood alone in my backyard, bathed in the glow of the pool lights, surrounded by the remnants of the uninvited party. A few stray towels, a half-empty bag of chips, and the lingering scent of chlorine and desperation. The peace I had so desperately sought was shattered, but in its place, there was a strange sense of quiet victory. I had reclaimed my space, stood my ground, and exposed a bully. But the night wasn't entirely over. As I began to gather the discarded items, I noticed a small, folded piece of paper tucked under one of my lounge chairs. It looked like a formal document. My heart gave a little lurch. I picked it up, my fingers trembling slightly. It was an official HOA notice, addressed to me. The title, stark and bold, read, "Notice of Emergency Hearing Regarding Immediate Removal of Unapproved Structure." My eyes scanned the first few lines, confirming my immediate fear. It was about my pool. Karen might have been publicly humiliated, but it seemed she had already set in motion a more insidious plan, a bureaucratic attack designed to strip me of the very sanctuary she coveted. This extreme event, a direct threat to my cherished pool, had been quietly brewing beneath the surface of all her public theatrics. The notice of emergency hearing trembled slightly in my hand, its stark lettering standing out against the damp, chlorinated concrete of my patio. The previous chaos of Karen's forced exit faded into the background as a cold dread settled over me. This wasn't just a threat, it was a formal declaration of war, a direct assault on my cherished pool, the very heart of my backyard sanctuary. Karen had been humiliated tonight, but it was clear her vindictiveness ran deeper than public embarrassment. She had already set this in motion, a calculated maneuver to dismantle my property under the guise of HOA regulations. The idea that she could orchestrate such a move, even while planning her audacious pool invasion, revealed a level of cunning I hadn't fully appreciated. This was her ultimate play, and it was designed to hit me where it hurt the most. The immediate aftermath of discovering the notice was a blur of frantic activity and simmering anger. I went inside, the paper still clutched in my hand, and turned on all the lights. My calm facade had shattered. The thought of losing my pool, the one place I truly found solace, ignited a fierce determination within me. I read the document again, every word confirming my worst fears. The hearing was scheduled for 2 days from now, giving me barely any time to prepare. The charge: unapproved structure and violation of community aesthetic guidelines. It was a flimsy pretext, considering my pool had been approved by the previous HOA board and met all city codes, but Karen had clearly twisted regulations to suit her agenda. My mind raced. how could I fight this? I was one person against an entire HOA board, now undoubtedly under Karen's firm control. My first instinct was to call Sarah and David. They were my closest friends in the neighborhood, and I knew I could trust them. Sarah, always the pragmatic one, listened patiently as I recounted the entire saga, from Karen's incessant demands to the dramatic pool lock-in and, finally, the emergency notice. "That woman is unbelievable," Sarah exclaimed, her voice vibrating with indignation. "She actually served you with that while she was breaking into your property?" The audacity! David, more measured, chimed in. "Alex, you need to gather all your documentation. The original permits, the approval from the old HOA board, everything. We'll help you. And we need to find out who's on the current board and rally some support." Their support was a balm to my frayed nerves. We spent the next day and a half in a whirlwind of preparation. I dug out every single document related to the pool's construction and approval. Sarah, with her incredible organizational skills, helped me compile everything into a neat binder. David, meanwhile, discreetly contacted other neighbors, many of whom had also suffered under Karen's oppressive HOA rule. The story of her being locked in my pool had spread like wildfire, and for once, the neighborhood gossip was on my side. Many residents expressed their outrage at Karen's blatant hypocrisy and her overreach. The day of the hearing arrived, heavy with anticipation. The community center meeting room was packed, far more so than any usual HOA meeting. Word had clearly gotten out. As I walked in, clutching my binder, I felt a surge of nervous energy. My eyes immediately found Karen, seated at the head of the long table, flanked by two other board members. She looked imperious, her usual mask of confidence firmly back in place, as if last night's humiliation had never happened. She didn't even glance at me. The meeting began with Karen, in her most formal and condescending tone, outlining the emergency issue of my pool. She presented a distorted version of the facts, claiming my pool was a rogue construction that threatened neighborhood harmony and was a blight on the aesthetic integrity of Willow Creek. She even hinted at potential safety hazards, despite its perfect safety record. Her arguments were weak, but delivered with such conviction that they might have swayed an uninformed audience. Then it was my turn. I stood up, took a deep breath, and began to speak. I presented my meticulously organized documents, the original city permits, the detailed blueprints, the signed approval form from the previous HOA board, complete with dates and signatures. I spoke calmly, factually, outlining every step of the pool's legitimate construction. Then, I shifted. "And now," I said, my voice rising slightly, "I would like to address the true threat to neighborhood harmony and the real violation of community guidelines that occurred just 2 nights ago." Karen visibly tensed. The audience leaned forward, hushed. "On the night of June 26, I continued, my gaze fixed on Karen, the HOA president. Karen, along with approximately 20 uninvited guests, illegally trespassed onto my private property and used my pool without my permission. This was not a misunderstanding. This was a deliberate, premeditated invasion." A murmur swept through the room. Karen opened her mouth to protest, but I didn't let her. "I have video evidence," I stated, pulling out a USB drive. My security cameras captured the entire incident, from Karen bypassing my gates lock to the entire party unfolding, and even the subsequent panic when I, the homeowner, activated my one-way locking system to secure my property. The room erupted. Whispers turned into excited chatter. The other board members looked genuinely shocked, exchanging nervous glances with Karen. Karen herself went rigid, her face paling. The public humiliation she had just begun to recover from was now being amplified, exposed to the entire community. "This footage," I continued, my voice gaining strength, "shows Karen not just trespassing, but also lying to the residents she is supposed to represent, telling them this was an HOA-approved event. It shows a child getting stuck in my fence due to their desperate attempts to escape from a situation Karen created. This is not just a violation of my personal property rights, but a massive breach of trust, a misuse of power, and a direct contradiction to the very community harmony Karen claims to uphold. I paused, letting the weight of my words hang in the air. Karen's face was a mask of furious, mortified disbelief. She tried to interrupt, stammering something about defamation, but many of the residents in the audience, now emboldened, began to speak up. She told us it was a party for the neighborhood, a woman shouted from the back. I saw her trying to pick Alex's lock a few weeks ago, another man added, pointing at Karen. It was Mr. Henderson, confirming my suspicions. The meeting descended into chaos. The other board members, clearly unprepared for this turn of events, looked utterly bewildered. They tried to regain control, banging gavels, but the dam had broken. The residents, tired of Karen's tyranny, seized the opportunity to voice their own grievances, recounting various instances of her arbitrary rules and manipulative behavior. The narrative had completely flipped. Amidst the uproar, a new, unforeseen event unfolded. A woman, whom I recognized as a relatively new resident, but who had been quiet up till now, stood up towards the back of the room. She held a thick binder, just like mine, but hers looked even more substantial. Her voice, though soft, carried an undeniable authority. "Mr. Chairman," she called out, addressing one of the confused board members. "I believe there are other, more pressing matters concerning the HOA president that need to be addressed immediately." She walked to the front, placing her binder on the table with a decisive thud. Her eyes, cool and determined, met Karen's. "My name is Attorney Brenda Smith, and I represent a significant number of Willow Creek residents who have grown increasingly concerned about the financial irregularities within the HOA under Ms. Karen's leadership." A stunned silence fell over the room. Even Karen, who had been sputtering with rage moments ago, froze, her face turning an ashen gray. "Specifically," Attorney Smith continued, opening her binder, "we have evidence of unauthorized expenditures, suspicious vendor contracts, and a significant diversion of community funds that appear to directly benefit Ms. Karen's personal businesses and properties, including a recently acquired vacation home in Florida. We have been conducting a quiet, thorough investigation for months. And given the blatant abuse of power demonstrated tonight, and Ms. Karen's public admission of breaking and entering, we believe it's time for this to come to light." She pulled out a document, a formal audit report, and laid it on the table. The words, "embezzlement" and "fraudulent activities," were bolded in one of the summaries. The revelation hit like a thunderclap. Karen, the self-righteous HOA president, was not just a bully, she was a criminal. Her carefully constructed facade, already cracked by my pool incident, completely shattered. Her eyes darted around the room, then landed on Attorney Smith's face, filled with pure, unadulterated terror. The other board members looked at each other in utter horror, clearly blindsided. This was far beyond a simple pool dispute. The room erupted into a fresh wave of gasps, accusations, and outright outrage. Karen, seeing her world collapse around her, her crimes exposed, stumbled backwards, knocking over her chair. Her face contorted into a silent scream, a stark contrast to the defiant Karen I had known. Before anyone could react, she turned and bolted from the room, pushing past shocked residents, disappearing into the night, presumably to escape the legal storm that had just broken over her head. The dramatic exit, a desperate escape from her own undoing, was a truly wild and unexpected ending to her reign of terror. The emergency hearing had indeed turned into an emergency, but not for my pool. It was for Karen herself.